If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. In this video, I attempt something new, and it doesn't exactly work out, but I learned the lessons along the way, and then I applied those lessons to the second project. So let's get started. So I'm starting, this is 11 and a half by, or 11 by 8.5 page. It is the Artist Loft mixed media paper. I've put a coat of gesso on it, and I am going to use this fractured flower stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. Now, this stencil intrigued me. It's very different. It has kind of the positive and the negative, and I have a vision in my head that with this space, it might make for an interesting all over pattern becoming the focal point. But I'm going to admit here, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to work out. But if you don't venture and don't try something, you're never going to learn. So my plan here is to put kind of green on the bottom, blue a little bit in the sky, and some bright colors for the flower. So I'm applying and creating the background color. Here I am using a makeup sponge, and I'm putting down the colors wet into wet so they blend, just to get a base coat of color down here. I've got this lower part that that's where the green is. So I'm putting the stencil back on to see what's peeking through, liking what I'm seeing. Now the center part, I'm going to use quinacridone magenta, deep violet, and I believe that was bright aqua. Just going to mix this wet and wet, the bright aqua and the quinacridone magenta, make a purple. So this, I'm thinking, is going to be the backdrop for that big center flower. Now, I am not sure how this is going to work out. I am out of my comfort zone. I am just experimenting. And really, that's what it's all about. What have you got to lose by giving it a try? It's just paint and paper, right? And I get to enjoy creating, even if this doesn't turn out the way that I want, which, spoiler alert, it really doesn't. Right now, I'm kind of struggling with the background. I have too straight of an edge down at the bottom. So I'm coming in with some Prussian blue and some colors down there, just so it's not such a straight edge. So the colors are actually brighter than what is appearing on screen here. I think it was kind of a cloudy day when I was doing this, so that kind of distorts the color on screen. You know, I keep putting the stencil back and thinking, okay, this might work. This might give me the effect that's in my head that I think is possible, but I'm not sure. So here I'm putting a little bit of gesso. So a couple places on here got a little bit too blended, a little too mottled and whatever. So if that happens, just take some gesso, put it down, and then once that dries, come in with a color and you can add more purple there. I'm getting rid of that straight edge where I put that green. Now, I could have just deleted this first part of this video and just put the second one in, and you'd be none the wiser. But I wanted to give you an example of basically a fail. I wasn't happy with the end result, but there are lessons learned, and I wouldn't have got to the second page if I hadn't done the first one. So as long as you learn the lesson from those fails, then it's a win. One of my favorite saying is sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. Well, this first page, I learned. So I'm taping down the stencil here just so it doesn't move because I am going to do a lot of stenciling through those open spaces. Now, what you see here, white, that's the plastic of the stencil. That is going to stay the color of the background. And where you see the background peeking through, that is going to be the color that I'm putting through here. And that is the bright aqua. And all along, I thought I was going to put white. And then I decided I wanted a little bit more contrast for the dark background. And this bright aqua always goes really well. It's very opaque. It looks really well as a contrast color. So that's why I chose it. I'm thinking white might have turned out better, but I'm not sure. So I'm going over this. I put the color through the stencil, and I do go over it a couple times to get it more opaque, get dark, better coverage. I wanted that teal to really block off everything behind it. Then I decided, I've got some open spaces on a stencil, and when you have that, one of the techniques you can do is do some stamping through the stencil. So I'm putting some black on this script stamp and stamping some areas through the stencil just to get some more interest in that background, because I'm afraid that teal, there's a lot of it, is looking pretty flat. Here I'm using white acrylic paint and this dot stamp and adding that to some areas. Now, stamping through a stencil is a very good technique. And I like the effect of it, and so I like. So I am going to do that in a more successful way in the second project. So here I'm using a trivet that I've turned into a mark maker, and I'm stamping again. So I've used 3 different stamps just to add some interest in the background. And I'm thinking, this is going to look good. I'm going to add some interest here. Moment of truth, I peel it back. I'm happy with this, but I'm thinking there's a lot of teal, and that surprises me. And this is something that I struggle with when I look at a stencil and the positive and the negative. I always seem to reverse it in my head. So occasionally I make mistakes and then I can correct them. So here I'm adding a little bit more script stamp with white. I just think I wanted a little more interest in the background. And I'm thinking right now, all that stamping is doing is really not quite what I wanted it to do. It's not adding interest, it's just getting overdone, I think. I'm moving on. I'm going to add some white and brightness. I grab my fine line applicator and I'm doing some line work or doodling with it. Now, in the fine line applicator, I have white acrylic paint that has been thinned. So it comes with very little pressure, comes out with very little pressure. But it gives you a fairly line. So I'm going to go around this. I do speed up the video in these repetitive parts, and I cut out some of the footage as well because it is highly repetitive. And this is working a little bit. It is brightening it up, making the flower part of the stencil stand out a little bit more. So as you are experimenting, quite often you have to do what I'm doing right here. You try something, and then depending on how it turns out, you're going to try something else. And that's going to lead to the next step and the next step and the next step. So I'm at a stage where I'm not sure what I want to do. So I'm going to edge the page by shading around the page. That kind of frames it, kind of helps me decide what do I want to do next? Or am I done? Hint from it. I am far from done. In fact, this page, I basically redid several times. So I was definitely working it and trying to do it. At this point, I decide that I don't like the stamping that I did through the stencil. So I'm taking some of that bright aqua and I'm painting over all the stamping and stenciling that I did. And I'm getting rid of it. I don't like the effect. It's just, I think it's better without it. So I am backtracking basically. And that's something that, I want you to learn. Nothing you do can't be undone, even on that page. So here I go, I just keep going and I'm painting over all of that stamping. Did you like the stamping? Or do you think, like I do, that this is better without it? So then I had to replace some of those lines, and then I found that the teal, again, is just too boring. So it's this on again, off again trial and error. So I decided I'm going to do some dot work, some more doodling basically on certain parts of that stenciled area. Because this is putting more white on the page, it's adding more contrast. That is adding some interest to the page. But again, I'm going little by little, adding the dots here where I think they could go, but I'm not sure. Where do I put them? Where don't I put them? It's an odd stencil. It's unique, and sometimes that takes a while for you to figure out how to use it in your art journal. I really like the flower part, that upper part, and I like the leaves part. So on another page, I might just use the leaves and then collage a flower at the top. Ooh, I like that idea. This is what I mean. You get creative ideas in the act of creating. If I hadn't taken this stencil for a ride, tried out some things, I would never have these other ideas. Then I decide I'm going to add a little bit of bling, add a little bit of that yellow by splattering with gold paint. And I like the effect of that. It kind of unifies the page, gives a little bit of something to what is really quite plain, the teal part. And I'm always happier. I grab my Choosing Joy sentiment pack. These are available at Ninny's Napkins. It's a digital download, so you can resize it for whatever size substrate that you have using your printer. And I'm just looking for a bold sentiment. And, I'm not exactly thrilled with the page, but the joy comes from the creative journey. I just feel better when I create. That's why I create. That's why I art journal. And yes, while I like a nice end product, the fun is all about the act of creating. So the joy really is in the journey. So I'm just going to glue that down with a little bit of fluid matte medium. And once dry, I'm just going to outline it with my Sakura glaze pen. You want to be sure to, before you use a Posca pen or your glaze pen, that whatever is underneath is completely dry and cool. I've had heat kind of wreck the nibs of the pen. But I'm not done. I now think that the line work that I did with the fine line applicator bottle was too thin. So I grabbed my Posca pen and it is a little bit thicker. It's going to add more white, which is more contrast, which is going to give more information, more interest to the page. And when you compare where I'm putting the bolder lines right now compared to the finer lines, I hope you agree that this was a better plan. So all the lessons that I learned through this one, use the thicker Posca pen, reverse the stencil so that you're putting the interesting color where the teal is. Stamping through the stencil I liked, but maybe it'll work better if I do it at a different time. So here is this finished page. I don't dislike it, but it's not one of my favorites. So I've got some close-ups of this. And then the next day, I decide to take that same fractured flowers stencil and reverse some things and apply the lessons that I learned through this process. So again, I've given a coat of white gesso to the page. And this time I am just putting the stencil right on the white page. So where you see the teal, that's the stencil, that is going to stay white, but the open spaces where you see white are going to be the colors that I'm using now. And I am using alizarin crimson, orange, and deep violet. I know those colors work, and some cadmium yellow. I know those colors work. I know that's going to give me a lot of contrast when I lift the stencil. So you're going to have the white, and then you're going to have all these bright colors. The lesson I learned also with that other on the other page was the colors got too dark. They weren't bright enough. So I was sure to add some yellow here and pick different colors. So sometimes it's not the fault of the stencil, it's user error. You pick the wrong color scheme, you do it in the wrong order. So if you don't give it another try, you never know. If you don't know, deep violet mixed with orange makes this beautiful rosy tone that is just absolutely striking. It's great for sunsets and for flowers. Just a warm color combination. Okay, a little bit of a sneak peek there. Is this working out the way that's pictured in my brain? Did I get it right this time by putting the interesting colors through? Thinking, you know what? I am going to stamp through that stencil. So I grab just archival ink and there's numbers on this. This is I think it's called Reflections. It's Tim Holtz, but it's got a um, fine stamp, small scale. So I'm just putting a lot of that. It's adding a little bit of black to the background, but not in your face. Adding a lot of interest to the colored part here. Moment of truth. I lift it up. And yes, I like this better. Before I take the stencil off completely, I am going to do some splattering. I like the splattering in the first one. I thought it added some good interest. So I'm going to splatter with gold here, and then I'm going to splatter with black. So sometimes on the first one, I think some of those were wins. There were things I wanted to do that did work, just not on that page necessarily. So I'm splattering gold. Gold looks wonderful with these warm colors. And then for contrast, I'm going to add some black. And I'm adding black now to go along with the stamping, but I have a plan to grab my black Posca pen and add black to this page. And ooh, loving it. So I'm going to make sure this is dry before I grab my Posca pen or do anything else. And before I do that, I'm just going to edge, just like I did on the other page. So the steps of this really aren't that different than what I did on the first page, but I was more successful. I picked a better color pattern. I stenciled it in the right order. Everything just worked a little bit better because I learned my lesson. So I could use my fine line applicator, but I want a bolder mark, so I'm using my Posca pen, and I'm going to add contrast by black. And I don't show all of this, but I'm just doodling right where that stencil is. So this is the perfect stencil for this. It has lots of openings and just allows me to add this detail in here. It's going to make everything stand out a little bit more. But it does take time. And I don't show all of this because, well, again, it's very repetitive. And I'm quite happy with the bolder black mark, so I'm glad that I learned the lesson from the first one. Needless to say, this page, because I didn't do things twice over, took a lot less time. And I'm doing some sketchy black lines around the outside edge just to frame the page. I had a lot of white space there, and I thought, oh, what could I do? So I grabbed my wooden letter stamps, and I'm just stamping the word joy with black archive or black ink or black paint. And I'm putting it on a Ranger blending foam and using that like a stamp pad. So I'm just stamping the word joy, joy, joy all over this page in some of the white spaces where I think it will fit. And I love how that worked. I just got another idea for using the leaf part, but I'm going to keep that because I have a plan in my head and you'll have to just keep watching the next video. And because everything is permanent on there, if I make a mistake like I did just here, I'll just take a baby wipe, clean it up, wipe it off, and then restamp. Now I could have left it with just the words joy, 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 joy all over the place. That would have worked perfectly fine, but nope, that wasn't going to fit there. I decided that I am going to use a sentiment stamp from my Choosing Joy sentiment pack. It says Choosing Joy, actually. And I'm going to cut off some of that white to make it fit better. And I decide I'm just going to bubble cut this. And when I say bubble cut, I mean I'm just giving it a white halo all the way around it to so it stands out and doesn't get lost against our background. So there's the joy part, and I'm going to leave the choosing kind of overlap and put it there. And just gluing it down once again with my fluid matte medium underneath and on top. Once it's dry, I decide, you know what, that leaf, there's too much white there. It's kind of interfering with me reading the sentiment or the sentiment standing out. So I just grabbed some of those colors that I used in that stenciling and just painting out that white part so that my sentiment stands out a little bit more. Grab the Posca pen, just outline that, the word choosing. So without a doubt, I'm sure you know that this one is my favorite of the two. Do you agree with me or do you like the other one? And if so, what? What do you like about each one? So there's the second page and there's the first. Same, but different. This or that. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, go get creative.